morning we have been talking about classic Hollywood period, remember? So, if my question remains that what is classic Hollywood period and what are the major features of that period, what will be your answer be? What is the features of classic Hollywood?
You talk about the studio system, major studios,
Yeah.
and also the beginning of stardom, how you had all these stars, Clark Gable and James Dean, and who came later on, but primarily you talk about the studio system and then later the stars.
Star system and how stars would be under contract with major studios, remember that? Okay, so where do stars figure during the 50s? When we talk about the 30s and the 40s and also early part of the 50s, then stars were a huge draw. The position of directors as a major box office magnet, that took place only during the later part of the 60s and the early 70s, the director's decade. That is what we call the new Hollywood period. Okay, but 50s saw an upsurge in making of a different kind of a hero. Okay. So, what were the 40s and 50s heroes all about? If we say that the hero in the 50s was a different kind of a hero, still stardom mattered a lot, still stars were under contract with the studios, but the studio hold was slackening by this time. And who were these heroes now? So, if we want to think about the heroes of the 50s, then we have to look at the heroes of the 40s and 50s also and even before. So, there was a huge box office star during the silent period called Rudolph Valentino. Are you aware of Rudolph Valentino? Are you? No. Take down the name. See, you are doing a course like this, you ought to know Hollywood history, motion picture history, and only then you can understand any other cinema. Sandeep, who was Rudolph Valentino? Superstar of the silent period. Can you recall any movie? The Sheikh, okay, where he plays an abandoned white boy who is raised by the Arabs. So, the Sheikh was a major blockbuster of Rudolph Valentino, and he was of a mixed race, extremely handsome, but however the fact remains that he was the first male superstar, and basically he was known for his looks rather than his histrionics. Yeah. So, those classic Greek god looks and silent star. So, naturally he did not have to speak any lines. He had a strong accent, his dialogue delivery was not very good, and there was nothing except his classic good looks, there was nothing much to recommend him, but still one of the earlier great stars of the period of Hollywood, and therefore his name figures in the greatest stars or greatest in pantheon of Hollywood stardom. There was a like mass hysteria when Rudolph Valentino prematurely died. He was not well and he died, he was in his early 30s, and fans just broke down and there was a massive hysteria outside his house, and people just went berserk because a huge star died, and that went on to create something called a coinage of the term called fandom. So, now fandom is a very common word, very commonly used word. We in Tamil Nadu, we have great stars, actors who have these fan clubs. Okay, so, we call them fandoms, where stars and their images, they are bathed in milk and what not, yeah, they are weighed in gold, etc. Women even try to commit suicide when a major star dies, that kind of thing. But historically Valentino is one of the most well known and the first documented star to have generated that kind of hysteria. After that, of course, we had major actors, stars, Clark Gable, James Stewart, Cary Grant, who had enormous fan following, especially among ladies. Even men wanted to be like Cary Grant. Cary Grant's own sexuality is suspect. He was a known bisexual. Now it's all out in the open, okay, but he nevertheless married 6 times, and yeah. So we were talking about the other day how making of a Hollywood star, Elizabeth Taylor, and also many of these link-ups and romances and marriages would be like studio manufactured devices just to keep the fans happy, and men and women alike should worship him. That was the idea. Now the hero in the 50s, so that those were the 40s and the 50s. Can you remember any other major stars of the period? Stars, actors. 50s are symbolized majorly by 2 of our greatest method actors, James Dean as well as Marlon Brando. Both come from New York school rather than LA. So they were not like manufactured stars, but they were trained actors. Elvis Presley, another 50s phenomenon, not a star in sense of movie star, but a huge star in terms of fan following. The Beatles as well. So you have the Beatles close on the heels of the Presley phenomenon. And if you watch a movie called A Hard Day's Night, have you heard of? Heard of, yeah. We will be doing excerpts from that movie soon. Okay, so please make a note of it. Beatles, Hard Day's Night and Help. They starred in 2 movies, beautiful movies, okay, and movies which are still very fresh, still very young in approach. So Elvis, James Dean and Marlon Brando, hero in the 50s. Now I will give you 1 minute exercise to just think over who were the major stars preceding Brando and Dean. Think about it. Major Hollywood stars preceding Elvis Presley of course, but he was not an actor per se. James Dean and Marlon Brando, great actors, phenomenal stars, but who were there before them? Think all your favorite movies, think of the actors starring. We are still on heroes and not heroines.
Bogart.
Humphrey Bogart, good. Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant.
Cary Grant.
Yeah. Henry Fonda,
Clift.
yes.
Monty Clift.
Monty Clift, again a New York product, New York acting school product, yes. Trained by the legendary Lee Strasberg, Stella Adler. They were the proponents or exponents of method acting in New York. Monty Clift, James Dean, Brando. But Monty Clift never generated hysteria, Brando and Dean did. That is the difference. So we agree, Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant, Clark Gable, there was a great star during the 30s and the 40s who would invariably star in all these gangster films. Do you remember his name? He was another major box office draw. James Cagney, not James Stewart. James Stewart was a favorite of who? Hitchcock, yes, and also Frank Capra. But then a Hitchcock movie is a Hitchcock movie. The director before, above the title is that kind of star. So Howard Hawks and Hitchcock were 2 directors of the classic period whose names appeared above the title, the name above the title. Remember whose autobiography? Good, Frank Capra's. So, hero in the 50s. So, we will see how there has been a marked shift from the heroes of the 30s, 40s and the early 50s and till Brando and Dean, and what brought about those changes, what were those socio-cultural changes and the difference in acting style and major trends in filmmaking. So, Brando, Dean and Elvis to an extent changed the way young men could be seen in popular culture. So, they were not the hyper masculine actors, the projected hyper masculinity as was evident in Clark Gable, in James Cagney, Humphrey Bogart. They were more in touch with the feminine aspect of their personality, not effeminate definitely, but more sensitive, more brooding, gave an aura of introspection and often appeared confused and ambiguous about many things including their sexual orientation. And this is a feature which is very common in Monty Clift also. So, the word or the term that is coined for them is protest masculinity, protesting against the established norms of hyper masculinity. So, therefore, they mark a shift from those hyper masculine stars to this. Now, see in the we saw the phenomenon again reoccurring during the 80s. Now, see 70s was again all about the method acting. Remember Pacino, Hoffman, Nicholson, De Niro, who else? Harvey Keitel. So, these were the New York trained actors, trained in the method acting style, and then cinema was dominated by the directors who are collectively known as the movie brats. Movie brats, Scorsese, Paul Schrader, even Lucas and Spielberg, yeah, the movie brats. So, that was the those were the 70s. Of course, Spielberg still survives, but 80s saw again a shift. Now, look at, you watch these method actors in the 70s, Pacino in Dog Day Afternoon, confused about his sexuality. He is married, he has fathered children, he still wants to give up his family and be with a man, right. You remember the movie Dog Day Afternoon. De Niro in Taxi Driver, disillusioned with war, and therefore, all his problems, all his confusions basically emanate from the factor that he is disillusioned with the society around him. Okay. So, working class man protesting against the established socio-political system in America. So, there was a protest. Okay. Jack Nicholson, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Harvey Keitel, Mean Streets, and a couple of other movies as well. All these trained in method acting. But what happens in the 80s? Who were the heroes? Who were the superstars of the 80s? Stallone, Schwarzenegger and Stallone. Okay. And also to an extent Bruce Willis, to an extent what is his name, Seagal, Steve Seagal, yeah. Okay. So, those were the actors who marked the 80s. So, there has always been a cycle, hyper masculinity followed by a cycle of sensitive actors, etc. And now what do we see? 90s onwards. Think of all our major actors, are they hyper masculine type? No, they do not embody that kind of masculinity as was illustrated by the Schwarzeneggers and Stallones. So, you watch Fight Club, okay, it is a very different kind of a hero or heroism or machoism you are talking about. There will be blood, it is a subversion of hyper masculinity and patriarchy. Anything else Paul Thomas Anderson's Punch Drunk Love, Magnolia, Tom Cruise in Magnolia, again interrogating the constructs of hypermasculinity. So, this is a feature. So, if you think every era defined certain kind of movies.
The same actors also have hypermasculine roles, like Tom Cruise had Collateral where he played a hypermasculine character.
But is still very confused, okay. Not confused about his identity, but a man who is not an out and out anti-hero. He is anti-hero, but is still not in the same vein as the Bruce Willis is, and he is not taking on the establishment. Yeah, it is not a one man army against this enemy. And for Bruce Willis, Schwarzenegger, Stallone, the army is very clear, the enemy is very clear, right? Very clearly defined, us and them. So, they also embodied a particular political ideology in America. Now, we do not have, there is lot of ambiguity. In all Paul Thomas Anderson movies, you have that theme. In all David Fincher movies, there is that theme, the recurring theme, the enemy lies within. So, James Dean 19, we are going to analyze a phenomenon called James Dean and what brought about this phenomenon and then his legacy. So, James Dean 1931 to 55, some of you are already familiar with his two great movies, Rebel Without a Cause and East of Eden. Those of you aren't, then please do watch them. And third major movie is Giant, directed by George Stevens. Worked with only 3 movies and 3 great directors, Nicholas Ray, we already discussed Nicholas Ray, George Stevens in Giant, and Elia Kazan in East of Eden. So, I think we have tried to cover all these 3 directors. Dean lost his mother at age 9 and he was estranged from his father. So, that was his background, a small town boy, and then thought acting would be his profession for life and shifted to New York, got trained in method school. He had this shuffling, mumbling style, and therefore, because of that he was often compared to the great Brando and was always called a mixed up kid. I think Elia Kazan was the first to name him so. And the story goes that when he was acting with the likes of stars, Elizabeth Taylor and Rock Hudson, who had nothing to do with method acting, both of them in Giant, they could never follow what he is saying. They would never understand. Elizabeth Taylor, of course, had some experience, some brush with method acting because she had acted in A Place in the Sun with Monty Clift. So, she knew what method acting is all about, but Rock Hudson and other people in that crew had no idea of what method acting is all about, and they were very uncomfortable with having James Dean around. His characters are often inarticulate. What do you understand by inarticulacy? Not just not being able to express, but also extremely confused about what they want to express. Okay. This is a theme that runs through the works of Daniel Day-Lewis also, okay, inarticulacy, yes. People, characters who are not able to come to terms with what they want to say. Okay. So, most of his characters, they are angst-ridden protagonists, almost like a precursor to the great method actors of the 70s, misunderstood outcasts. And in all his 3 movies, he is desperately craving approval from a father figure. Just 3 movies, but already. So, there is a theme there running through there is a thread that runs throughout his body of work. So, Elia Kazan directed East of Eden, as we have already talked about it, Rebel Without a Cause and Giant, just 3 movies. Giant is by George Stevens. So, East of Eden, based on John Steinbeck's novel, is set in rural California and was released after Dean's death. part of the movies, the movie that we get to see is based on the book of Genesis, and the Kazan was basically concerned with the father son and the brother, the conflict between the two brothers, so the Cain and Abel section. That was another theme, another motif in Kazan's body of work also, conflict between fathers and sons. So, remember, therefore, he collaborated with Arthur Miller so well. Death of a Salesman, All My Sons, again the same story. Giant, 1956, is based on a novel by Edna Ferber, a monumental meandering novel based in Texas, where Rock Hudson plays a rancher who owns some 50,000 acres of land, and James Dean is a worker there, a farmhand, and who falls in love with Rock Hudson, his master's wife, as played by the beautiful Elizabeth Taylor. And Dean's character, he strikes oil. We are told that during the, have you watched the movie Giant? Do watch it, I am sure it is available online somewhere, and if you do watch it, it is a great study in a particular period in American history. So, we are told that James Dean has been bequeathed a plot, a very small part of the land by Rock Hudson's dead sister, who remains a spinster, and the James Dean character has served her very well. So, before dying, she names a small section or plot of land for him, and he strikes oil and then becomes a billionaire, richer than Rock Hudson. And then he ages 40 years, and then you actually find all these actors aging on screen, although they were not old, they were not yet in their 40s and 50s, but they acted, and it is a very well acted movie. Rebel Without a Cause, one of his most defining films. I mean, if you look at the way he is clothed in the movie, so that started a trend. Blue jeans, red jacket. So, his famous dialogue, "You are tearing me apart." Who does he say this to? His father, basically. And you say one thing and he says another, and everybody changes back again. So, a typical teen pick, that is what we call them today, but not a teen pick in the along the lines of Clueless. Okay, it's a very serious kind of a teen pick, which gave vent to the angst of the teenagers those days. And the title says it all, Rebel Without a Cause. They do not know against whom they are protesting. They feel they are being very cool when they protest. But this is the background. Juvenile delinquent movies were extremely popular in that era. There was a movie called The Blackboard Jungle, where students protest against teachers. It's a very popular film, and Rebel Without a Cause takes its cues from The Blackboard Jungle. So, in Rebel, Dean stars as Jim Stark along with Natalie Wood and Sal Mineo, who was another method actor. Sal Mineo is the boy who dies, the kid who dies in the movie. Okay. And Brando was initially considered for the role, but then he was thought to be too old to play a teenager. And if you watch the movie, I just assume some of you have watched the movie, and his performance does show distinctive influence of Brando. So, Rebel Without a Cause was coined in, the term itself was coined in 1944, before the movie came out, by a psychologist, sociologist called Robert Linder, who had written a book in 1946, and Warner Brothers had bought the right to the book. And I am quoting something from the novel, from the book, sorry. The psychopath is a rebel, a religious disobeyer of prevailing codes and standards, a rebel without a cause, an agitator without a slogan, a revolutionary without a program. So, that is what defines a rebel according to Robert Linder. So, who is a rebel? Rebel is a milestone in the creating of new ideas about young people. The novel as well, the book as well as the movie basically deals with the concept of unfocused rage. These young people full of rage, but they do not know who the rage is against, whether it is the teachers or the authority figures, the lawmakers, etc., or their parents. Precedence in cinematic history is from Marlon Brando's role as a motorcycle gang leader. So, it was one of those, today we call them bike flicks, right, the biker flicks. So, one of Marlon Brando played the role in The Wild One in 1953. Influence of Marlon Brando, they are like far reaching. You watch a movie like Ghulam, Amir Khan's Ghulam. Which movie is it based on? He is a boxer, he is asked to throw a game by his brother, and the brother is in league with these so called small time goons and thugs. So, which movie is it based on? And then the brother is killed. He is the peacemaker between various people. He is also a lawyer in the movie, right? And there is another activist who gets killed, and then our hero, he turns into a rebel. So far he is a drifter, but then when he watches his brother die and when he watches this activist die, then he turns into a revolutionary of sorts, a one man army against this army of goons. Which movie is it based on? On the Waterfront. So, but if you, how many of you have watched Ghulam? Amir Khan's Ghulam? No? Do watch it, and watch it back to back with On the Waterfront, also Rebel Without a Cause. Now, why are we talking about Ghulam at this point? Because in On the Waterfront there is no biker gang, but in Ghulam there is one. Do you remember? Okay, there is a group of bikers who always arrive on the scene whenever there is some problem, and they are always on bikes. Okay, so biker gang, and they help the hero out in one of his major moments of crisis. So, that scene is a total lift from The Wild One. Now, also we had a phenomenon called Elvis Presley in 1950s, and along with Brando and Presley, Dean created a kind of role model that altered the way young men were perceived. The so called enemies, everyone who is in authority. There is a book called A Generation of Vipers by Philip Wiley, and the book coins a term called momism, mama's boys, moms and momism. So, they want to rebel against the concept of momism, because we have been like stripped of our masculinity by our mothers. So, momism. Hand-pecked father, bossy mother, and that is something that you find in Rebel Without a Cause as well. What can you do when you have to be a man? Jim asks his father at one point in the movie that, because why are you so dominated by my mother? Okay, so the cause, nothing really, he does not have any cause. It is a story which takes place within 24 hours, okay, yeah, very tightly knit plot structure, and 3 teenagers from LA, all brimming with undirected rage. What is the other guy's problem? Sal Munoz. He is just brought up by a governess, parents are never at home. He is one of those very upper middle class kind of a boy, and he lives in a very comfortable surroundings, but then when you remember how the movie opens? in a police officer's room. Okay, all these three have been arrested for some reason or the other, for just causing some minor disturbance in the neighborhood. And James Dean, for James Dean, his parents come to bail him out. For the girl, her parents come, and then for the boy, for the other boy, no one comes except his governess. Okay, parents are separated or divorced, something like that. Very wealthy, but no affection. What is the girl's problem? We are talking about, you know, undirected rage. So what ails the girl in the movie? Yes?
Father.
Yeah, she is very affectionate towards her father, but he is in no mood to listen to her. Okay, and he says after a certain age, girls have to be more reserved, more like ladylike. And she says, why? Okay, so those kinds of issues, right. So rebellion against emasculation of the father, who lacks decisiveness and strength. And at one point, James Dean says, she eats him alive and he takes it. So again, you know, a kind of a protest masculinity. Men have to be assertive, but then he is not a very assertive man. He is not the hyper masculine man, but he is identifying a certain problem that was identified with by many people before him, that women are slowly emasculating men in American society. On being a man, that is what he says about his father. If he had guts to knock mom cold once, then maybe she would be happy and she would start picking on him. So other issues were like juvenile delinquency, and also the conclusion is that grown-ups also do not have solution to teenagers' problems. James Dean phenomenon, we were talking about making of the James Dean phenomenon. So just 3 movies and today he is immortal. Why? One was the style, okay, the way he was styled in the movie. See, he is not basically remembered for Giant. Okay, in Giant he ages 40 years. By the end of the movie you see him like a 50-year-old or late 50s, something like that. East of Eden, yes, very respectable movie by the great Elia Kazan. So Kazan got the major chunk of credit and also based on a classic American novel, but Rebel made James Dean what he was. Okay. And his iconic red jacket, the hairstyle, okay, we are talking about making of a star here, and fast car, fast bikes, all these things you do not see in Giant. The switchblade scene, if you watch the movie, please mark it, the switchblade scene where he is involved in a knife scene, and the Chicky Run scene, remember? Chicky Run scene where they challenge the rival gangs, you know, that is let's run, let's race cars, and whoever gets out fast or gets out before is a chicken, is a coward. That is the scene that was replicated in Ghulam as well. It is not there in On the Waterfront. Okay, so Ghulam is many movies. And the cult world, the language, the jargon of the teenagers. James Dean died in his Porsche, which was called a Little Bastard. Rebel Without a Cause was released after his death, and the Chicky Run scene prefigured his own tragic death, his love for fast living and fast cars. It is sad and it is very eerily coincidental that James Dean also participated in a road safety campaign, where he urged drivers not to drive rashly. Remember, the next life you save could be mine. That was the slogan. Now, who are fans? We are talking about fandom and James Dean. So, who are fans? That is my question to you. Who are fans? Are you a fan of any actor? Yes, Kranti?
Daniel Day-Lewis, Jeff Bridges.
Okay, Daniel Day-Lewis is a major actor. He may not be a star. He may not be a huge phenomenal star, because see, he never cultivated himself that way. He did not play the star game. That is also one thing, he could have done that, but there are some people who deliberately stay away. But then there are some people who play that image of heroism. Okay. Daniel Day-Lewis never repeated himself, never created an iconic image for himself. Same can be said about Benicio del Toro. Okay. He never played those games, but then there are certain people who do these things. Okay. So, James Dean, perhaps we can't say that he played it up, but by default, perhaps because of his very premature death, he has come to become an all-time role model, a star. Okay. So, fans, who are fans? Now, here we see a picture where an actor in chains, they want to institutionalize you. This is fan, this is becoming, this is like a part of fandom. This is what fandom does to you, institutionalize you. How do you institutionalize someone? We say, right, he is not an actor, he is an institution by himself. How do you get institutionalized? I am sure all of you know what are the practices, what do people do, what do fans do. We have a great star actor, Shah Rukh Khan, and we see him always surrounded by fans. Okay, fans, and also who plays up to their image? The media, fanzines, popular magazines, media. Nowadays, you also have social network sites. Okay. So, these are the Twitter, Facebook and all those kinds of things. So, what do? They institutionalize you.
Religions, like some stars have like these
followers.
Cults.
Yes. Can you give me some example?
Kushbu has a temple.
Yeah. Does that still exist? They rebuilt it? Good. Okay. Yeah, I am sure that there are certain stars, at least in our country, who are institutionalized by religious tropes. Okay. Now, what does it mean to have your own fandom? What is fandom? Fandom entails the meaning of being a fan, a group of people coming together and institutionalizing something. Okay. Fandom studies investigate how fans express their likes and dislikes, and nowadays you have all kinds of things, all kinds of medium for fans, all kinds of platforms for fans to express their likes and dislikes. So, the moment a movie is released, next day there would be like millions of posts about that actor, about the movie, because you have a fan following. Fans are following you literally nowadays on social media. Okay. Fans discuss, comment and write on films. Perhaps they are not qualified to do that, but they do that because they are fans. So, they have every right to do so. Fans, of course, they can be manipulative and they can be manipulated as well by marketing forces. Can you give me some instance on how fans can be manipulated? Well, every time there is a new movie coming up, you just have to generate certain kind of a story about a star, and then you look at the hysteria that follows among the fans. That leads to there are numerous examples, and if you watch it very carefully, you will find anywhere in the world, and especially in our country, whenever there is a major movie up for release, there is always some kind of a controversy, then because that generates interest. That is the way media and stars manipulate fans. Fans will be there, but then it's another thing, it's another art to manipulate their emotions. That will of course result in more footfalls. Sometimes fans can also influence and control the film as a product. Can you give me some example?
There was this movie which was made in Kerala about 10 years back, which is starring both Mohanlal and Mammootty and Joey Chawla. So the thing is, she has to choose between either of them. So they actually came out with two endings for the movie. In one she chooses Mohanlal, the other one she chooses Mammootty.
You cannot antagonize the fans. So
Yeah, so they screened it in different regions. So depending on whoever had more fans over there.
Mani Ratnam's Dalpati is based on which epic? Mahabharata. And which role is Rajnikant, superstar Rajnikant, essaying? Karna's, right? And what happens to Karna in Mahabharata? Does he die in Dalpati? Yes? Does he die in Dalpati?
No.
No, he doesn't. Okay, why?
Rajnikant.
How can you show Rajnikant dying on screen? You see? So, some fans control the film as a product. So, it does not matter to us what authenticity or being faithful to the epic. Fans control the way things are done. We were just talking about Coolie. Coolie's original screenplay had Bachchan dying at the end, but because he had just come out of near death experience. How many of you are not familiar with the Coolie accident? Mr. Bachchan almost died during a fight scene, during an action scene, during the shooting of the movie, and he was hospitalized for many months following that accident. And it was, sometimes the rumors would have it that he is already dead, and those we are talking about 1982, when we did not have all these media channels, etc., television channels and so many newspapers and magazines, but fans would throng the hospital throughout. And some occasionally the rumor would be floating in the air that Mr. Bachchan is no longer alive, whatever. Okay, but then he came out of it, and the movie was eventually completed and it was released in 1983. The original screenplay had him dying at the end. Because he has come out of this near death experience, the director had to change the ending of the movie, because now you can't show Bachchan dying on screen. And interestingly, after Coolie, his career started going downhill, because see, you have been deified to that extent. After that, anything whatever you do cannot measure up to that level. And the other movies that followed were just not there. I mean, they just didn't capture the phenomenon. Okay, they were very mediocre products, etc. And now he has been deified to the extent of being almost like God. He can even defeat death. So, the only movie as far as I can remember which had Bachchan dying after the Coolie incident was Agnipath, and it was a miserable flop. It was a flop for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons for its flopping was that people were just not interested in seeing him as a hero, one, yeah, and also the fact that he dies on screen, because people were no longer interested in watching him die. There was another lesser known movie called Main Azad Hoon, based on Frank Capra's Meet John Doe, which again had him dying on screen, and the movie was not even released properly. A Bachchan movie not finding a release. So, the legend continues. We have numerous James Dean appreciation societies. Warner Brothers even made a movie, a documentary called The James Dean Story in 1957. There are several biographies, and he is also a gay icon. His biographies, The Mutant King and James Dean, Boulevard of Broken Dreams. There is another biography just called James Dean, and then Silver Screen Mavericks, and on the cover you can see James Dean, Marlon Brando, Steve McQueen and Johnny Depp. He also represented Cult of Youth, Eternally Young, Eternally Alive, and the only two deaths that can match up to his legendary death and the phenomenon that ensued. One is death of Rudolph Valentino, we were just talking about him, the silent movie star actor, and then Marilyn Monroe, and how these stars have been institutionalized. James Franco did a movie called James Dean, how closely he resembles him, no? And then the legacy continues. You have John Travolta doing a James Dean in Grease, and that is Matt Dillon. Any questions on making of a fan or phenomenon? So, these are the things we have been talking about stars also occasionally in this course. We talked about method actor, and now we talked about a great star and a phenomenon. Okay, so, thank you very much. We will be continuing tomorrow.